Welcome to the EDIFY podcast, where our guests share practical wisdom on living our faith in public. I'm Mary Fiorito. Thank you for joining us today. Today, we're sitting down with two guests to discuss violence and vandalism, that which is still ongoing, directed at churches and pregnancy resource centers since the leak of the Dobbs decision in May 2022. Most of the violence has been perpetrated by a terrorist group called Ruth Sent Us, presumably named for the late Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. First, we'll be speaking with Ed Whelan, a distinguished senior fellow of the Ethics and Public Policy Center, and is the author of the book Scalia Speaks. Ed, great to have you here today. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me, Mary.
It's a real privilege and for a number of different reasons. First of all, not only are you a distinguished constitutional scholar, you don't just play one on Twitter, as so many do, as I see from time to time, but you actually clerked for a Supreme Court justice.
I had the privilege of clerking for Justice Scalia some 30 years ago, yes.
And also you served as at least a staff member for the Senate Judiciary Committee, yes.
I was counsel to Senator Hatch for the Senate Judiciary Committee, again, nearly 30 years ago, right after my clerkship with Justice Scalia.
What did you think about the leak? How did you feel about it as a former clerk?
The leak was outrageous. We'll see if we ever get to the bottom of it, but I think the most likely theory is that someone aimed to produce very much the series of events that followed, including the death threats against the justices in the majority.
Yeah, the turmoil that it caused. And I know, as you mentioned, personal threats to the justices and including, frankly, what was an attempt on the life of Justice Kavanaugh. Amy Coney Barrett's children's school had been made public, the address and where she worshiped on Sunday, etc. Do you believe that there's been adequate media reaction to what are, I think, clearly national and very critical news stories?
On the one hand, some might say that the more attention that it gets, the more encouragement there is for people to take part in these threats. I don't think that's the reason the media hasn't covered it. I think you have this incredible bias of the media on abortion, where the tiniest iota of a story that can be used for the pro-abortion side becomes headlines and stories after stories, and anything that puts the pro-life side in a sympathetic light simply gets buried. So I think that explains why there's been very little attention to the death threats and very little interest, I think, on the part of the media in trying to uncover who was responsible.
Right. And even coming from, in my opinion, from the White House. A very sort of, again, muted response, not the sort of, really passionate feelings that you would expect to see if a Supreme Court justice, a sitting justice, is threatened.
You would have hoped that you would have had resounding statements right from the outset and repeatedly as necessary from the White House, from President Biden, from Attorney General Merrick Garland, emphasizing the absolute importance of resolving our differences through peaceful means and condemning violence of all sorts. But there was very little of that.
Yeah, and at a minimum, I just as a parent, and you're a parent as well, could have thought they would have said, listen, you can be angry at the people who made these decisions if you think they're wrong, but people's children, especially minor children, are always off limits. No one makes threats against the children of elected officials or, justices or judges. That seems to me to cross a line. And when it's not more forcefully condemned, that makes me a little bit nervous.
Well, unfortunately, the progressive vision now is essentially a totalitarian one in which all weapons are available. The personal is the political, and norms of civility are dismissed as white privilege or patriarchy. So it's a very dangerous thing for the future of our country if we cannot address matters civilly. There are problems on both sides. I don't mean to say it's entirely on one side, but it doesn't help to have the Biden administration complicit in this.
Yeah, I think that's the right word. I do think it's complicit, and silence is betrayal. In the same light, Ed, or in the same vein, Since the Supreme Court leak, there have been 112 attacks on Catholic churches, and at least as many, if not more, against pregnancy resource centers. You were involved when you worked for Senator Hatch in helping to create the FACE Act. Can you explain to listeners what that FACE Act is?
Sure. Actually, I was working to try to defeat the FACE Act, or at least broaden it to make it less one-sided. But FACE in the FACE Act stands for Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances. This was a federal law that was enacted in 1994 to give the Justice Department a tool to combat the obstructions and blockades that were occurring by Operation Rescue and other groups around that time. And there were as well just some terrible incidents of violence, including killings that we need to highlight. So there was this drive to give this authority to the Department of Justice, and the law. Importantly, the law as enacted has a very broad definition of, I believe it's reproductive health care, and the word facility, which makes clear that the law protects pro-life counseling centers as well as abortion clinics. I drafted a series of amendments to try to expose how the bill was privileging the issue of abortion over other matters. And most of those amendments were rejected, but one that protects churches was, to my surprise, adopted and became part of the law, which is why you have this strange provision in the midst of something called the Freedom of Access to Clinic Entrances Act that also protects churches against attack. What we have is this law that's in effect that gives the Department of Justice a tool that is especially important to use when local and state authorities are not enforcing the laws that are available to them.
Right.
So this is exactly the situation in which you would expect DOJ, the Department of Justice, to think about intervening and starting to make strong statements to condemn this violence, which, again, if there have been any such statements, I've missed them.
Yeah.
And instead what you have is an administration that is really entirely in hock to the abortion industry. There's no single issue that matters more to the White House and its supporters, that matters more to senior officials in the Department of Justice than abortion.
Right.
And anything that might help the pro-life side, anything that might be perceived as showing any sympathy for the pro-life side, including victims of violence, you're not going to get any of that from this administration.
President Biden does regularly say that he is a devout Catholic, that he practices, but there were cases in which the Blessed Sacrament was desecrated and where the Stations of the Cross were torn off the walls and smashed to pieces, where the liturgical books were shredded. I mean, really, really vile and violent things, particularly when the tabernacle and the Blessed Sacrament is desecrated. I mean, for us as Catholics, as you well know, that just stops your heart. And that a Catholic president wouldn't say something about something that went so far that it brings tears to the eyes of most Catholics who even hear it.
As for President Biden, I mean, I can't see into his soul. I can read and hear his words. My impression is that few devout Catholics actually describe themselves as devout Catholics.
True, right. We're always aware of our own sinfulness, right?
Much less accompany it with a threat to knock your teeth out if you suggest otherwise. But look, he's at a very advanced age where it's not clear, how, frankly, how on top of things he is. So, it may well be that he simply staffed his administration with folks who are running amok on this.
Well, and let's just shift gears slightly and talk about the pregnancy centers. They're also covered by the FACE Act. One was firebombed. We've seen actual threats. If Roe is not safe, neither are you. Spray painted on many of these centers. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. Well, as you probably know better than I, many of these places are run by grandmothers who are just eager to provide counseling to young women in crisis, women who really don't know what they want to do, and who in so many cases just need the comfort of someone who says, "Hey, we can make it through this." There's incredible amount of material aid, including housing, diapers, all sorts of things that are designed to help these young women. And this is a story that's largely untold. What we have instead is this myth or lie that these pregnancy counseling centers, do nothing more than deceive women. So many women have been grateful for these resources. That this propagandistic attack, I think, is really outrageous.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a shame that there's not a better appreciation for what these pregnancy counseling centers do. If people on the other side really care about choice, there ought to be massive support for these counseling centers that do so much to enable choice.
Exactly, and they do, and it's real choice. It's giving them real options. And I had the privilege of serving on a pregnancy center board for more than 20 years, and in 99% of the cases where we could say, "Oh, you don't have a place to live? We have a home. You don't have medical care? We have OBGYNs who deliver babies for free." When you removed what they saw was an obstacle they could never overcome, all of a sudden they were like, "Oh, wow, I can do this. Someone's going to help me." Often it's all women need is being presented with real options.
Yeah, we spoke earlier about the media bias, and imagine the thousands and thousands of stories there are out there about young women who initially thought that abortion was their only option, and now have the children who are the light of their lives, and who are just there are incredible stories there to be told.
Right. Well, so CatholicVote, of which EDIFY is a project, has been tracking. We have an actual CatholicVote violence tracker where you can see the number of churches and the number of pregnancy centers and where they're located. And I believe, according to the tracker update this morning, only about 25% of these vandalism cases against churches have even wound up in an arrest, much less an investigation. That's an extraordinarily low percentage for something that's protected by a federal statute. Why do you think the DOJ is dragging their feet on both the church aspect of it and the pregnancy center aspect? Why aren't they being more assertive or even mildly assertive about going after people, or at least looking for the people who are doing these crimes?
Because promoting and defending abortion is the top priority of this administration, the top priority of so many senior officials in the Department of Justice. Those who aren't, passionate about it themselves are going to defer to those who are. So on matter after matter after matter, the one constant is that abortion is the highest sacrament of this administration. Let me add that the George W. Bush administration was involved in prosecutions of under the FACE Act of those who attacked abortion clinics, and vigorously defended the constitutionality of the law, that the laws would be enforced. So we have a completely different situation today.
Right.
As you pointed out, there is a group that claims credit for many of these, and I would think it would be less difficult to try to probe who is running this group and to investigate it and to put an end to it. But again, the problem is that no one in the Biden administration cares, and in most places, the local authorities don't care.
Well, is there anything the average American listening to this podcast can do? Other than going to vote in the next presidential election, how do we respond? What would be an effective use of our time?
Well, I think contacting your local representatives as well as your members of Congress, matters, even if you're in a place where you're overwhelmed by the other side. Look, there were 2 votes the other day in the House, both of which ended up in pro-life victories, so to speak, but in which there was overwhelming Democratic opposition. One called for the protection of the lives of those who survive abortions.
Born Alive Protection Act, right?
Yeah, as Charles Camasey put it, and I saw in a tweet today, the opposition to this shows that what the other side cares about is not a right to choose abortion, but getting a dead baby out of it. The other was a resolution condemning the violence against pro-life counseling centers. And again, I think there may have been 3 or 4 Democratic votes out of 200 and whatever it is, 15 in support of the resolution. So you need to weigh in, talk with your family members and friends and neighbors about this. This is an issue, the abortion issue, that is going to be very high profile for the next few years as the legislative landscape sorts out. There's a lot of intimidation of pro-lifers. And I think it's just important that you stay informed and that you make your views known. Let me mention, if I may, you kindly mentioned the book Scalia Speaks. I did not write it. I co-edited it. It's a book of...
Oh, sorry.
No, I want to clarify that because it's going to be of far more interest to your listeners because it's Justice Scalia's own speeches. For those who are out there who want to know the man, no better way than to read the book Scalia Speaks, Reflections on Law, Faith, and Life Well Lived.
Yeah. And listeners, I would second Ed's plug there because I have the book and it's just magnificent. If you really want to see who he was as not just a lawyer and a judge and a thinker, but as a person, that's the book to pick up. Well, Ed Whelan, the Distinguished Senior Fellow at the Ethics and Public Policy Center, thank you so much for so generously giving of your time today. It's been a joy speaking with you.
Thank you, Mary.
Next, we're going to be speaking with Nancy Anter, the Executive Director of Pregnancy Aid Detroit, which is a pregnancy resource center that was recently attacked in December of 2022. Nancy, welcome. Thank you for being with us.
Hi, thank you, Mary. Thank you for having me.
Well, it's a privilege. I am so interested in speaking to you about your experience. And so can you just share a little bit about your personal journey? Why did you start to volunteer in the first place? And just briefly, how you wound up as the executive director.
Well, it's kind of, I was a volunteer. My children were in elementary school, so I had lunch kind of free. So when I wasn't doing lunch duty, I stopped by Pregnancy Aid. And I've wanted to do it. I kept seeing it in the church paper, so I was attracted to it. Just my own personal background. I hadn't planned really on sharing it, but I'm a birth mother. So I remember what it was like to be a teenager, to be pregnant, to go through all of that with the medical front, in society, with other people. And there weren't pregnancy centers per se. I was in Ann Arbor. I went to U of M, and I turned to the church, and the Catholic Church supported me, gave me a couple of names of people, families, women who would be helpful. And it was amazing how helpful they were just individually. So when fast forward, you're married, you have kids, they're in school, I see this ad in the paper. I'm like, I'd be good at that, I think, just because I have a background and I kind of get it.
Well, God bless you. That's an incredibly courageous story, first of all, to live, but then to share. Do you share your personal testimony with the women that you counsel?
No, so I don't know why I'm sharing it now. I do if it's relevant. But I realize that when you're in the room with a mom, it's about her.
Right.
So listen more than talk. And if it comes up, it's because she asked or the question opened that can of worms that normally would not have been opened. And I've had that happen. I'm considering adoption, but I'm really afraid. And I might say, well, it was a while ago, but I have that experience in that. Would you like to talk to, because we have people who have chosen abortion, chosen adoption. We have people who were adopted and then adoptive parents. So if somebody were in a situation where they wanted to talk to somebody, we have firsthand testimony. So it does come up rarely. And when it does, I do share it. I try not to open with that in public, like with you. Well, I'm kind of breaking my rule here, but you asked me directly. I don't know how to answer any other way. But if I do a presentation at a church or any other, I try not to, because it's also my son's experience, and I don't want to co-opt that for my purpose or Pregnancy Aid's purpose. I think it's kind of a violation of privacy. So I'm a little tiptoey, but if somebody asks me, it's my experience, and so I share it.
Right. Well, it's a powerful testimony, and I'm grateful to you for sharing it with our listeners. Let's talk a little bit about Pregnancy Aid Detroit. When were you founded? What kind of services do you offer to women in crisis?
It's a great story. It was founded by 3 women who were so disappointed after Roe v. Wade became legal nationally. And they were in a church, St. Paul Catholic Church, which has supported us ever since we started. So right after Roe v. Wade, they decided together that women who wanted to choose life or who couldn't see that they could but needed a little help needed some free support that was confidential. And that's how it started. And it's been going, it grew from somebody's idea in a basement, then to a church, then to a small building we have right now between 2 abortion clinics.
Wow.
Really grown over 46 years.
Terrific. And what kind of services do you offer then?
We offer free pregnancy tests, free ultrasounds. We have classes on postpartum depression, breastfeeding, relationships, reading to your children, budgeting, just general support groups. We have a licensed counselor on staff too, who can work with people for free individually or in groups. We also offer material aid for moms, maternity clothes and baby clothes up to about 12 months, 18 months. We have equipment. We are now doing a pack and play class where women can come and they learn about safe sleep, and then they get a brand new pack and play. And we give a lot of referral information to ladies who aren't in prenatal care, who need extra help. All of it's free. We have walk-in, we have appointments, and all of it's confidential.
And how many employees do you have?
We have about 5 poorly paid employees and a handful of volunteers.
Well, like many pregnancy centers, the core of the ministry is our volunteers and are normally moms who have experience in being a mom and contribute their time and their energy and often their financial resources to help women who are complete strangers. And that's really, I think, the beauty of the pregnancy center movement. It's women helping women that they don't know and they may never see again.
Right.
But they want to be that supportive voice. I know when I was pregnant the first time, I think I called my mother 3 times a day, and I had a husband and I had health insurance, and but I was frightened, right? Because it's all these new experiences. And if I can't imagine going through that with literally nobody to talk to, it's those kinds of intangible services that pregnancy centers provide. That really, I think, is sort of the heart of the movement.
If I may say, it's also hard to quantify the kind of support we give so that people on the outside who don't know what a pregnancy center is can see the full range of services. You can't count or write down or report when somebody has a breakdown in your bathroom and you go in the bathroom and you sit with her on the floor and you talk about whatever. You can't. But any mom knows what that is. All moms know what that is. We've all had moments where like, oh my goodness.
We've all been there. Yep, we've all been there.
But yes, we need practical things too, because in addition to one support person at least, they also need practical support because it's expensive and scary for most women.
Yeah, no, it is, of course. Well, let's talk about some of the claims that are made against pregnancy centers and why so many of them might now be the victims of violence, which is probably the one I hear the most often, that, Elizabeth Warren, the senator from Massachusetts, has so breathlessly and hysterically been proclaiming that these are fake clinics. She was saying there are 3 times more pregnancy centers than abortion clinics. Like, that in and of itself was a bad thing. Like, here's the pro-life movement who's always accused of not wanting to help women or helping them. And we have 3 times the number of pro-life clinics as we do abortion clinics. But that's apparently a bad thing. But that were fake clinics. How do you respond to that ridiculous statement?
Well, I would challenge anyone who makes that claim to prove it. Have you been in here? Have you ever come into the center? Ever? And I don't want to invite angry people in to pick and choose, but I mean, we have open door. Walk in.
Right.
If you just came to where we're located on 8 Mile and you saw our center, you would see pregnant women, you would see babies in car carriers coming in, and you would see people leaving with our help. We have a security guard who carries out all of this equipment for them. We balloons and we have baby showers and we have all kinds of stuff. It is just joy and happiness. And people are bringing things out to their cars and we're hugging them as they leave. And in perfect contrast to that, the abortion center where the women who exit have to exit through the alleyway in a car that's waiting for them, and then they just go away. And And people have said that. Wow, I just look across the street and it's night and day. So anybody who makes that accusation, prove it. Tell me what I'm doing wrong. Tell me where giving diapers out, what is it?
Let's talk a little bit about what happened then. What happened to Pregnancy Aid Detroit? It's about a month out since you all were the latest victim of violence directed against pregnancy centers. Can you break down what happened and how you learned of it?
I learned of it on Saturday morning before work because our board member, whose home was vandalized, texted me with pictures. And I'm like, oh my goodness. And so
it started with a board member's home being vandalized.
That's how I found out. I don't know which one was done first, but it's speculated that it was done by the same person. So I found out from her right away that morning when she found out. And then our board president, these are all volunteers, by the way. And then our board president called and said, hey, go check out the center. I said, I'm on my way because we're going to open in a minute. So I arrived at our center and found vandalism also on one side of our building. And so we opened and we had a nurse practitioner come in and teach a class on postpartum care and women coming and going and taking material aid. And we opened anyway.
What did the graffiti or the vandalism look like?
So on her garage and driveway, the vandalism named her. So that was startling because her name could be spelled lots of different ways and they spelled it correctly. And if abortion isn't safe, you aren't either.
So her name, if abortion isn't safe, you aren't either, by name.
Yeah, which is a direct threat of violence. And then Jane's Revenge was there. But they named her specifically, spelled her name correctly, and they threatened violence. So that was startling. When we arrived at the center, there were 3 phrases on the side of the building. One was liar, one was fake clinic, and the other phrase was Jane's Revenge.
Mm. And did you call the police?
Yes, we called the police and she called the police, 2 separate cities. And we told both cities that, hey, these 2 things are related. And I live in her city too. So I called where we live and I said, this is related. Please, draw a picture and help us out here.
And how did the police respond?
Well, they came out and took a report, both at her place and at our location. And then when I called, they didn't quite see my point initially, but then I went in and explained it and it became more clear to them just as time went on.
You had to go to the police?
I did. But I thought it would be better to go in and have a face and just say, hey, I live in this community. This happened to my neighbor. We're, affiliated in this center, pregnancy center. And I didn't want to get all political. I just wanted to say this was violent. It's a threat. Can you please have my back? Just drive by. And they said they would. So the 2 cities are working together to try to help that nothing else happens and to try to figure out who did it.
Did they offer any kind of protection to you, or did they offer to drive by a little more frequently? Did they ask you to look for if you had camera footage, anything like that, a doorbell footage? And was there anything? I know I'm giving several questions in a row here, but did that investigation reveal anything that might have been helpful in catching the perpetrators of this?
Well, the board members saw them at a distance. She was awakened because they were breaking her window. She thought they were being broken into. They violated her door ring by spraying the red paint on the camera lens and at her front door. And they also did the damage to her garage door and her driveway. She said she saw 2 people fully clothed, including masks, run to a Prius. And it was at roughly 2:00 in the morning on December 17th. So she was able to give them a lot more information than we were at the center because I wasn't here. But we do have cameras and they took footage and they came here and they investigated that. So it's ongoing.
Okay.
Authorities were interested specifically because there was a threat of violence and it's a hate crime. And they see them as connected. They hypothesized that it was the same group that did both at similar times, on the same time.
So what has the reaction been from your donors, from your clients, from the greater community?
It's been amazing. It really has. I would never want anything bad to happen, but if something bad had to happen because of other people, it's nice to see the community rally around us. The day that it happened, a woman walked by with two young kids, teenagers, 11 and 13, and she said, "We live in this community. We saw what happened. We want to be helpful to you. We can help you paint it." And I don't know who she is. She just walked by and said, "I see you guys. I like what you do." We've had an outpouring of support. We've had secular media come in and do lots of reports. And so locally it's gotten a lot of attention and people are calling just for that. "I saw you on the news. I can't believe what happened. This is terrible." So,
well, what about Governor Gretchen Whitmer's office? Has anyone from that office or her administration reached out to you?
No, I personally emailed the governor's office and I did not get a response.
Just nothing?
And I asked specifically if she could denounce this as a hate crime, as she would for other things. And we're not political. We're a 501c3, but I live in Michigan. And this, she's had violent acts threatened against her in a really, really scary way. And all of us rallied to her, whether in print or emotionally, because it wasn't right. She was elected in a free society, and here she is. And that was terrible. So I I guess naively expected her to say, "Yeah, that's terrible too." And I did not receive a response.
Tell me, are your volunteers afraid to come in now? Are they concerned that harm might come to them while they're counseling women, etc.?
I have to say, the day that it happened, people were shaken and kind of quiet. And I said to everybody, if you guys want to go, you can go. I don't want anyone to feel like you're stuck or you have to. And their response overwhelmingly was, "No, we're good." Everybody stayed. Now, we've had a few people show concern, but, it's up to them. And it's a real threat. I don't blame them. I mean, I'm afraid too.
Right. Just as we wrap up here, Nancy, is there anything that you would want our listeners to know either about your center or about the incident that took place that we haven't covered in our conversation?
Well, I would like that the listeners to know and to tell people that pregnancy centers offer support, and that I would hope that as a group, all of us could help dispel the myths that we somehow strong-arm people into doing things that they don't want to do. We're not that powerful. We're not that devious. It's the wrong thing to do, and we don't do it. And if there's ever any question, they can come in and visit. In fact, if anyone who's listening just wanted to come in, "Hey, can you tell me what you do, just in case I hear somebody who might need help?" Come over. We give you a tour, because the more people know, the more we become just they're the place on the corner. They're the go-to place. The more it's going to be normalized in society. And that would be my hope, is that everything that we do, all the fruits of everyone who does help in pregnancy centers, which includes the volunteers, the workers, all the donors, would spread the word so that the truth, triumphs over all of this myth, and that people think of us when they're pregnant, and we'll do the best we can to help them.
Well, and perhaps that will be an answer to prayer in some ways. We know God can always bring good out of evil. And maybe this is an unintended consequence from those who perpetrated, these crimes and these threats against you, is that people will, first of all, know who you are, perhaps be inclined to support you, who may not have known of you previously, but will also be educated about the purpose of pregnancy centers and about the very real women and their children who've been helped.
Absolutely. If they knew, too, that we'd got no government funding. This is all just the community helping the community.
Well, Nancy, and blessings on all of your work and your volunteers and your workers. And we certainly will be praying for the right outcome to this act of terror and violence against your clinic.
Thank you, Mary. Thank you for your time and attention. I appreciate it.
Listeners, if you want to learn more about the connection between pro-life victories and hate crimes against churches, how the Department of Justice should and doesn't prosecute anti-Catholic violence, and concrete steps that you can take to bring about change, please check out CatholicVote's new ebook about this situation. It will be linked in the podcast description below. Thank you for listening. To make it easier for you to listen to future EDIFY podcast episodes, please make sure you subscribe over at Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Thank you.